Good morning and welcome to Wake Up to Broker Up with Mark, episode number 42 for 2025. We can all learn something new each and every day, even your brokers, even me. Last week's episode was about a scenario that was real and people seem to really respond to it. You guys like the ones that are challenging that actually happen. So here's another one. So this week we had the opportunity to release earnest money through a TNR for a buyer that Atlanta Communities represented. So we get the signed TNR and we go get ready to disperse the earnest money back to the buyer, only to realize that the person who tendered the earnest money to Atlanta Communities on behalf of the buyer was not the buyer. So here we have a signed TNR signed by the buyer saying the earnest money is supposed to go back to the buyer, and then we look in the system and find out that the name that submitted the earnest money is not the same as the buyer's name. What do? If you give the money back to the buyer, it's not really the buyer's money because somebody else gave it on behalf of the buyer. If you give it to that person, you got a signed document that says, hey, this is supposed to go back to the buyer, and the buyer says, hey, where's my money? I have a document that says you're supposed to give it to me. Ooh, what to do? Well, guess what? Little did we know that GAR had already handled this situation. Now, we've had this situation before, and we've gone to extraordinary lengths to get the person who submitted the earnest money to give us the information and say, yes, it's okay for you to give it back to that person, or get the buyer to say, yes, it's okay to give it back to the person who gave the earnest money. So we have handled it and handled it successfully. We never had either the buyer or the person giving the money on behalf of the buyer come knocking on the door and saying, hey, where's my money? But GAR had already taken care of it. I remembered that there was a Seth Weissman video, found one, it was from 2021, and in there Seth talked about the GAR form F525, which is the acknowledgement of person contributing earnest money on behalf of the buyer. Who knew there was a form? GAR F525. Go look it up. Check it out. It's pretty cool. So the person giving the money on behalf of the buyer says, yes, I'm giving the money for earnest money on behalf of this buyer in the amount of X. And I understand by doing that, I have relinquished control of that money to the buyer and to things that happen to the buyer contractually, such as the thing falling apart and the earnest money going back to the buyer, the seller claiming the earnest money and it ended up going to the seller if you have an earnest money dispute. They relinquish the rights to the money in the form. So what did we do? How did we solve the dilemma of the one that we had sitting there? Well, ultimately we contacted the agent and said, hey, where did the money come from? Who is this other person? To which we found out that that was the parent of the buyer. And so we sent the F525 to the parent of the buyer, and the parent of the buyer fortunately signed off on it, sent it back to us, and we dispersed the money to the buyer. Wow. An easy scenario in the end, but there's a form. So if you have somebody submitting earnest money on behalf of the buyer, you need to look at the F525. Go ahead and check it out. Get ready in case that scenario happens to you when you're out there helping buyers buy and sellers sell. Enjoy your day. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks for watching. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.